Oh man.
Don't shoot ports from retention. It'll fuck you up.
Hey everyone, I'm Brett, and welcome to Nightwood Guns. If you're one of my subscribers, you've been waiting for this video forever, very highly anticipated. If you are new to the channel and you're watching this video, get ready for a very informative video on 6 months of collected data and testing on ports versus comps for everyday carry and whether or not they're worth it at all. This video was definitely very costly as far as time and money goes, so a big thank you and round of applause to today's sponsor, DPM Systems. There were a couple of comps and ports that I ended up getting for the testing of this video that I was kind of disappointed in when I took them to the range. I was expecting some more performance, but plugging a DPM recoil reduction system into those guns brought them up to the next level and made them some of my flattest and softest shooting guns out of the whole bunch. So if you're someone who's running ports or comps, I highly recommend the DPM system. I independently reviewed them and highly recommended them before they were ever a sponsor for the channel. If you enjoy this video and you want to take your gun to the next level, go over to DPM Systems website and put in Nightwood at checkout for a little bonus. And of course, a big thank you to my patrons. Without you guys, this channel wouldn't even exist anymore, so thanks for holding me accountable and for supporting the channel. You really help offset some of the cost when it comes to this stuff. So if you like what I'm doing here at Nightwood Guns and you want to monetarily support the channel, feel free to check out the links in the description below for my Patreon, and you can find my fictional short novels that are action-packed, awesome, easy reads on Amazon. Now, if you're poor, don't worry, you can still support the channel by watching the video all the way through to the end and leaving a comment down below. That tells YouTube, this video is tasty and we should show it to more people. With the life support for the channel out of the way, let's hop into the video. Now, I can't in good conscience jump right into this video without dropping some hard facts when it comes to ports, comps, and accessories for guns. When it comes to reducing recoil or reducing muzzle rise with your pistol, nothing will take you farther than grip. And I'm not talking about the actual grip on your gun, I'm talking about the way you grip the gun. Proper grip technique, excellent grip strength, and the ability to overcome flinching and shot anticipation by maintaining consistent grip pressure throughout your strings of fire. That way you're not loosening your grip or squeezing your hands while shooting. That is going to make the biggest difference. That will take you 99% of the way to being just that next level insane shooter that you've always wanted to be. There are no holes that you can drill in your gun and no accessory you can slap on there that's going to make up for that lack of technique. The purpose of ports and comps is to take a proficient shooter and either overcome a plateau or to make it easier to perform at a higher level. So with that being said, why ports or comps for everyday carry? So the number one comment that I get when it comes to compensators or ports on my videos is, well, if you need a compensator or ports on a 9mm handgun, then you're not a man, or you need to lift some weights. What do you need that for? It's a waste. Now, first of all, those comments usually come from an emotional place that they're poor and they can't afford ports or comps, but it also comes from a genuine abyss of misunderstanding on this topic. Ports and comps on these everyday carry guns and also in competition, it's not there to tame this insane recoil, although honestly, sometimes it is and it genuinely does help there. The point for EDC is to take a handgun that already has low recoil and low muzzle rise and tame it even more to get it as close to zero muzzle rise and zero recoil as possible. Now that group of people is probably thinking, well, I can shoot my stock Glock 19 just fine, or my 10mm will put him down with one shot. The problem is human beings, if they are in it to win it, are very difficult to stop from attacking you. I need to be careful about my language here because I'd like to keep monetization on this video if possible, but essentially what we've learned over the years is the most effective way to stop somebody from doing what they're doing is to put a high volume of fire into the upper torso. The reason for that is because there's 3 different types of stops when stopping an attacker. There's a psychological stop, which is, oh no, I've been shot and now I'm panicking and I'm gonna quit doing what I'm doing. Number 2 is that you poke enough holes in them that they leak out and pass out. And number 3 is stopping them in their tracks with either a heart shot or a brain shot. And Cletus, I hear you. You go out to your trash pile and you can hit a soda can standing still while taking 10 seconds to aim at it every single time with no pressure. But when you're in a three-dimensional environment with other people running around, fighting a thinking and adaptive attacker who is shooting back at you, getting that headshot, it's pretty difficult. That's why the upper torso is where we aim, because there's lots of goodies in there that can stop someone and leak someone out faster to stop them sooner. So while your projectile needs penetration, expansion, and velocity to reach the goodies to do their job, the most important thing is shot placement. You need to hit those goodies. And with a target that is turning, twisting, falling, shooting back at you with other people running around in the background, you need to be aware of your backstop. The best thing you can do is to have more chances faster to hit those goodies. That is why the vast majority of people are carrying 9mm, including law enforcement and military. It's not because they're sissies that can't handle the recoil, it's because they can put more shots more accurately, faster on target. They get more chances faster to hit the goodies. So what do compensators and ports do? They reduce the muzzle rise of your firearm so that it returns to zero faster, so that you can shoot a follow-up shot faster and more accurately. And when you have the absolute chaos of a defensive situation happening, you want every advantage you can get. That's why the industry is shifting towards ports and comps on carry guns. But remember, proficiency in technique comes first and will take you 1,000 times farther than ports or comps will. Now, if you are that proficient shooter and you're ready to gain that advantage, let's take a look at ports first. Now, straight from the Kendo custom shop, we have a ported Beretta here. Now, as you can see, the pros of porting your barrel is it does not add length, weight, or bulk to your firearm, and when it comes to everyday carry and inside the waistband carry, that's a huge advantage. If you want to see how important that is, look at the compensator on this Beretta. The other huge pro of ports is they're more likely to be effective than comps. So if you're getting your gun ported from a reputable place, I sent this one into Langdon Tactical, Monsoon Tactical is another huge place, Vulcan Machine Works. I mean, there's so many places that do excellent porting work. Chances are you're gonna get a very effective port. Let me put it this way, when I was testing out the Radian Ramjet Afterburner and I got the Glock 19C, when I shot the 19C and compared the price of both setups, I was like, uh-oh, that 19C is a lot of bang for your buck. So this all sounds incredible, and it sounds like ports are just 100% the way to go. So what's wrong with them? The first con of ports is losing muzzle velocity. Now, a lot of people don't think this is a big deal, and maybe I'm an unpopular opinion on this, but I think it's a pretty big deal for an everyday carry gun. Muzzle velocity does two things on a carry gun. One, it's going to ensure expansion of your hollow point, and it's going to transfer more energy into your target. But as any informed person knows, all pistol calibers are woefully underpowered. Well, maybe not all. But honestly, I would prefer to have that extra transfer of energy, especially when we're talking about a loss of velocity like 70 feet per second loss of velocity with the most effective ports that I shot, the Monsoon Tactical Lucky 7s ports. Now, this was on a friend's gun, so I didn't get a lot of trigger time behind it, but I did get a lot of trigger time behind the 6 ports on the Beretta and the slot ports on the M&P Performance Center and the Glock 19C. And those ports you're typically losing about 30 feet per second, but they're not as efficient as something like Lucky 7s where you're bleeding off a lot of velocity. Not only can that affect the ballistics of your round, like expansion, penetration, it can also make your bullet take longer to hit a target at distance. So if you have somebody who is moving laterally at any kind of distance, you need to lead them more because it's going to take a little longer for your bullet to reach them. BJ Baldwin's defensive encounter is a great example of this, is he realized how long those bullets were actually taking to reach the guy who was shooting at him. And because of that, he started looking for higher velocity rounds.
For example, one thing that nobody thinks about, velocity of a bullet. While I was being engaged and she was being engaged, there was a lot of movement taking place. And at 14 yards, my bullet didn't get there before the threat moved out of the way. So 7 to 10 inches off point of aim, point of impact.
And we've also seen high-profile incidents of active shooters where a civilian took them down at distance, specifically Jack Wilson and Eli Dickens, those two heroes that capped their active shooters, and that was at significant yardage. So you want that bullet to get there as quickly as possible at distance. Now, this is getting into some pretty specific lightning strike chance territory, but it's something to consider because we've seen it happen before. Now, another con of ports is it can affect accuracy. Now, does it affect accuracy in a practical sense? Not really. With a ported gun, even in a worst case scenario, you're going to be able to easily hit A zones in the torso out to 25 yards. In fact, you're even going to be able to hit steel silhouettes out to 100 yards, maybe even further. It'll hit somewhere on that silhouette. Where you run into an issue is that 25-yard A-zone headshot. Because when I benched all of these guns, put them on a rest, at 10 yards, I struggled to shoot tight groups with all of the ported guns, with the exception of the Glock 19C, which managed to stay consistent somehow. Who knows, it might have something to do with the polygonal rifling? I don't know. But the Smith Wesson M&P Performance Center with the factory ports, when I reviewed that a year ago next to the SIG P320 Spectre Comp, I was shooting really tight groups at 25 yards from a bench with the Spectre Comp, and I was shooting like, 3, 4, 5-inch groups at 25 yards from a bench with the M&P that was ported, and it just was kind of really inconsistent grouping. And at the time, I thought I had a lemon or a bad barrel or something, but after all of this testing over the last year, I realized it just has something to do with porting your gun. When you start poking holes in your rifled barrel, it is gonna have some sort of effect. So while your accuracy will be good enough for the vast majority of defensive scenarios, it's still a little unsettling that if you need to take a headshot at distance like Jack Wilson did, that maybe the accuracy is going to be a bit out of your control. Now keep in mind, this is just my opinion. I want you to form your own conclusion, but it's my philosophy that I want my gun to be able to perform to my accuracy standards, what I'm capable of pulling off. I want my gun to be able to do. Now keep in mind, the chances of actually having to pull off a headshot at significant yardage in a defensive encounter is astronomical. But again, we've seen it happen, and it's my opinion that we should learn from the experiences of others in case we find ourselves in that situation. Now, while the loss in velocity and slight loss in accuracy may not be a big deal for many of you, the thing that is a big deal to me is the shrapnel that comes out of these things. When you port a barrel and that projectile is traveling through their hot lead, hot copper jacket at over 1,000 feet per second in a nearly airtight tube spinning, and it hits those ports, it can shave off pieces of copper jacket and hard pieces of carbon buildup and eject them out of the ports. There is a reason that many instructors have banned ported guns from their defensive firearm classes, because some students were getting hit with pieces of copper jacket when shooting from retention. And I know there have been tests on the internet from high-profile instructors and people in the industry where they will prove that ports are bad by putting up like a piece of cardboard and shooting underneath it, and you can see where stuff is hitting it. Sometimes they'll put up a piece of paper or a fruit. And there are a lot of internet tough guys or people who think they know better or think that it's not that big of an issue, commenting and saying, oh, well, in a defensive situation, I can take some of that and be just fine. Well, in anticipation of those comments, I decided to do something stupid. I put on my full wraparound safety glasses and decided to shoot a ported gun from retention.
Oh man. Don't shoot ports from retention. It'll fuck you up.
Now, if you watch closely, you can see the sheer velocity and force that shrapnel and shreds of razor-sharp, hot copper jacket are hitting my arm and just piercing right into the meat. After this happened, I left the range, went back home, and spent about 30 minutes picking out pieces of hardened carbon and copper jacket out of my arm. And if you would have asked me, I would have said that I was 100% sure that I got all of it out of there. But sure enough, 3 months later, my body pushed out a piece of copper jacket. And then 5 months later, in fact, this was just 2 nights ago, my body pushed out another piece, and it looks like there might be a third piece on its way out pretty soon too. So even though I really dug around in there looking for as much shrapnel as I could, there were at least 2 pieces that made it so far into my arm that I couldn't find them or see them, and they came out on their own months later. Now again, I'm sure some of you are like, well, you know what, defensive encounter, if I have to shoot from retention, I can eat some of that shrapnel if I have to in order to save my life. And I'm sure the vast majority of dissenters are thinking, well, I will just, turn my gun 90 degrees so that it's spraying the shrapnel away from me. And my argument back to that is, sure, if you are going to shoot from retention in an ideal situation, you can keep your arm clear, your face clear, tilt the gun out, and plug away. But we have also seen in a couple of high-profile attacks that you can end up ambushed on your back, getting your head pounded into the cement, and you have to fight over your gun and touch off whatever rounds you can. You might not be able to have time on your back grappling with someone fighting over your gun to turn it perfectly away from you and plug away. And trust me when I say those shards of copper jacket that entered my arm would take out your eyeball. You could permanently lose your eyesight forever. The last thing you want is one of those shards going right through your pupil. And even though I wear eye protection pretty much all the time, I wear glasses, I'm a nerd, they are not full wraparound glasses, and shards can very easily go up underneath, through the side, whatever, if I need to plug away on my back from an unconventional position, whatever. When you get into a lethal fight, they are chaotic, unpredictable, and you do whatever you can to survive. The last thing you want is to lose an eye because you just had to have the cool ported gun for everyday carry. Now, it would be kind of cool to end up wearing an eye patch, but I mean, at the same time, don't want to lose that depth perception. Now, I am by no means telling you what to do or not do. I'm just making you aware that these things spit shrapnel, and you might think, well, the 19C is, cut sloppily from Glock and cheaply, and one of these properly cut from one of these more well-known specialty shops would be better. Well, the ports on this Beretta were cut with an EDM, that's using an electrical current, to keep all sharp edges off of this thing to reduce any kind of shrapnel or debris that might get shaved off the bullet and shot out the ports. Well, I certainly was not going to put this under my arm again, so I did a little bit of Googling and found out that banana skin is very close to the skin on your arm, and I learned that some medical students will learn how to suture on a banana so that they can get an idea of what it's like on human skin. It's not exact, but it was the closest and cheapest thing I could find on Google in 13 seconds. So I bought a banana and tested the Glock 19C on it, and sure enough, it was shooting out shrapnel into the banana and making it bleed. And then I got out the ports that were cut via EDM to reduce shrapnel, and the same thing happened. In fact, one shard went so deep and was so big that it made a larger wound cavity than anything the Glock 19C did. So no matter what ports you have, just be aware that these things are spitting razor sharp copper jacket at your body, probably. As long as you know that going into it, I'm just all for informed consent. So those are the pros and cons of ports for everyday carry or self-defense use. Let's hop into compensators. So the first pro of a compensator is it's typically going on a threaded barrel, and a lot of the times, and when you buy like a compensator kit, it comes with a threaded match grade barrel. So you're actually picking up velocity and accuracy with the compensator over an OEM barrel. So while with the ported gun I had an OEM barrel ported, and obviously the Glock 19C was an OEM barrel ported M&P, same thing, this one I put in an aftermarket true precision barrel that is threaded so it's longer, going to pick up velocity from that, and match grade, better fit, it's going to have better accuracy. So even though you're still getting the effects of reducing muzzle rise and felt recoil, you're not sacrificing velocity. And on average, compensators on their threaded barrels are typically picking up 30 feet per second of velocity over stock barrels. And keep in mind, that's a 60 feet per second gain over a ported barrel. And at the two extremes, the Lucky 7's ports versus the Jarvis compensator on the Beretta, you are looking at a difference of 120 feet per second between the two options. With plus P ammunition, compensators on their threaded barrels are typically picking up 40 feet per second over an OEM or stock barrel, and are picking up between 50 to 70 feet per second with plus P ammunition versus a ported barrel. That means your bullet is going to hit the target faster at distance, it's going to cause more damage in tissue traveling at a higher velocity, it's going to ensure expansion, and you're getting the benefits of reduced muzzle rise. Putting something like this True Precision barrel, or this Jarvis barrel, or the Radian Ramjet that are all match grade barrels, you put those on a rest, you can punch one whole groups all day with these things. Which means in that lightning strike chance where you need to put your skills to the test and nab yourself a 25-yard headshot to put down an active killer, then your gun's gonna be able to perform right up there with you. Confidence in your gear is very important in the self-defense space, and having a barrel that performs accurately definitely inspires confidence, at least in my opinion. So wow, Brett, you're making the point that compensators are the way to go. Well, compensators also come with their own set of cons. The first one is the most obvious, and it just adds weight, bulk, and length to the end of the gun, which for an everyday carry gun can be a pain in the butt. More weight on your belt and a longer barrel down your pants can lead to discomfort or challenges in mobility, what have you. Now, I do want to say the industry is shifting in a very exciting direction, because you look at something like the Radian Ramjet Afterburner, it turns your Glock 19 or G45 into the length of a G17, in fact, less than that even, just barely, with this compensator that is still a dual port comp that performs pretty well. Compensator design is more important, in my opinion, than pattern and placement of ports. Most ports are going to perform efficiently. Sure, there are some out there that don't work as well as others, but for the most part, compensators are more challenging to get them to work well. You have a dual port comp like the Parker Mountain Machine here that absolutely slays and is up there with the best of ports. This thing rocks. And then you'll get something with a giant chunk port in the end of it, like the Staccato. Those are the best compensator options. But a lot of people for EDC are running those really short, small single port comps like Parker Mountain Machine. I know that a lot of people are putting them on the SIG P365s and XLs, or they're running the SIG like integral slide cuts that act as a compensator. The reason they do that is because it barely adds weight or bulk to the gun, and in the case of the integral one, it actually reduces weight. The problem with those, however, is they are not very efficient in reducing muzzle rise or felt recoil. Are they better than not having a comp at all? Sure, but is it worth the cost to put it on your gun for that little itsy bitsy tiny piece of gain when ports work exponentially better? Speaking of single port comps, I'm just looking at my chronograph data here and the conclusions that I came to. The single port comps did not pick up or lose much velocity over the threaded barrel that it was on, which means it's not really doing much work since it's not bleeding velocity. So while it definitely feels like it's taking the bite out of the gun, it's not working overtime like ports or dual port comps would, or a chunk port comp. The best way I can describe it is there are two types of compensators. Ones that just take the bite out of the gun, and ones that make the gun flatter and softer shooting. Those integral comps and the single port comps just take the bite out of the gun. You know, I'd rather it be there than not be there, but it's not really worth the cost for how little it does. Then there are the comps that are like the long dual ports or the Staccato XC giant chunk port that significantly work. Wow, these things are amazing. They'll blow your mind. These are compensators that are 100% worth the investment. And then there's the compensator that kind of falls in between, and that's the Radian Ramjet Afterburner. This thing is very unique because as far as efficiency, it falls somewhere in between the two. It's not insanely effective and makes your gun really flat shooting, but it's also not as useless as a single port comp. It's kind of found this little in-between space in there, but it is significantly shorter and lighter weight. It's not adding a lot of bulk to your gun while still being fairly efficient. Not only that, but shooting compensators from retention just throws gas in your face, no shrapnel or bits of carbon that are gonna hurt you. It's unpleasant, but it's not gonna damage you. Now, speaking of the Radian Ramjet Afterburner and how innovative it is, another huge con of many compensators, especially ones like these guys, is installation. You have to Loctite these guys on there. This one you have to line up with shims, big pain in the butt. These two you have to put set screws in there, Loctite everything down, and good luck taking them off. These things are basically permanently on there. You can't take it off for maintenance unless you are looking for a huge adventure to go on. However, the Radian Ramjet Afterburner uses a single taper screw on a proprietary ported barrel. This thing doesn't require Loctite or anything. It stays in place, easy on and off. All you need is a Torx head screwdriver, and you can disassemble it and maintain your gun effortlessly. And then of course, when you get into big boy territory, you have the integral comp. That's just the barrel. Go about your day and act normally. But the final con about compensators, and this very well could be the biggest one, is cost. When you send in a barrel to get ported, yeah, you're gonna pay for it, but it's fairly reasonable. Just the biggest downside is the lead time. It can take forever, but if you have 2 OEM barrels, send one in to get ported, shoot with the other one. That is exactly what I did with the Beretta. But a factory ported gun doesn't cost much more than a non-ported. But you buy a factory gun with a compensator on it, like the SIG P320 Spectre Comp, you're gonna pay for it. If you wanna add a Parker Mountain machine to your Glock, you're gonna pay for it. Radian Ramjet Afterburner, you're gonna pay for it if you can find it. On top of that, many of these comps come along with match grade barrels. So with the Radian Ramjet Afterburner, the Parker Mountain Machine Ultra Comp, you have to pay for the barrel and the comp. Even in this case, I had to buy a threaded barrel to put the comp on. This is a lot of cost, and the question is that cost worth it? Now this actually just occurred to me as a con for compensators on the spot here. I didn't even think of it when I was planning out the video, but many compensators require threaded barrels in order to put them on the gun. And there are a few states in the US that have restrictions against threaded barrels because that makes sense. Obviously a ported barrel doesn't require that, but that's the beauty of the Radian Ramjet Afterburner, is this is not a threaded barrel. The Ramjet is a proprietary ported barrel that the compensator just locks onto with a single screw. No threaded barrel, 100% legal. And then of course, something like the Staccato XC with the integral comp, no threaded barrel, good to go. Just something to consider as far as potential cons on your compensator journey. So now that we've broken down the pros and the cons of ports and the pros and the cons of comps, there are some things that both have in common that need to be discussed before we come to a conclusion. First of all, both the ports and the comps benefit from changing out springs, either putting in a lighter spring or, best case scenario, putting in a DPM recoil reduction system. Those two things really improve the ports and the compensators, so that's just an additional cost to consider if you want your gun to perform as well as possible. Now, like I mentioned on the Radian Ramjet Afterburner, I strongly recommend the Soft Captured Edition DPM system for this thing. It performs the best out of everything I tested, but if you don't want to go that route, I recommend going with a 15-pound spring to get the most out of this. Same thing with the ported Beretta and the 19C. They both perform admirably on their own, but I was specifically disappointed in the performance of the Beretta ports, so putting in that DPM kit made this thing shoot so soft it actually blew my mind. It made all the difference. So ports and comps both benefit from changing around springs. Believe it or not, by some miracle, I never experienced a malfunction with the OEM springs in any of these guns. I had a failure to lock back with the dual port compensator on the LTT Beretta, but that's it. Now, I did have weak ejection with some of these, but putting in the appropriate DPM system improved ejection drastically, which probably prevented issues from happening down the line or as the gun got dirty or dry. Next up, as I touched on, design matters. The pattern and placement of ports matters, and the design of the compensator also matters. For example, this Harrington Arms HC43, I love this thing with the DPM kit. Without the DPM kit, it worked, but barely. Kind of in that single port compensator category of, this is almost not worth it. Now, the side ports on compensators actually cause less side-to-side movement when shooting. Now, proper grip technique will make the gun predictable, go straight up, straight down, predictably the same way every time. However, the side ports just help that if you might make a mistake in your grip. It just makes it even more predictable under less than ideal circumstances. That being said, it doesn't do much for actually reducing muzzle rise. So these are all things to consider as far as comp design. I do recommend dual port compensators. That's why I love the Radian, because it's side-by-side ports so that it doesn't add length to the gun. Not as efficient as one of these longer dual port comps, but definitely better than a single port. And of course, these big ol' chunk ports. As I mentioned before, the Monsoon Tactical Lucky 7s ports are the most effective ports I shot. The slotted ports in the Glock 19C and the M&P seem to perform extremely well, about on par with the dual port comps. When you get into compensators that were designed to be as efficient as possible without considering everyday carry, mostly keeping competition in mind, when you get into stuff like this long dual port compensator from Jarvis, or the compensator on the Checkmate from CZ, or any kind of race gun compensator, or you get into these integral comps on the Staccato XC, or the Atlas, Nighthawk, any of those, these are pretty much gonna smoke ports every single time. Efficient compensators are really hard to beat just because of the way they're designed and the limitations that ports have. Now, someone out there has to be thinking, but this video is about EDC. Well, believe it or not, I do actually carry both of these guns. Mostly the Staccato XC, but I've been playing around with this Beretta from Langdon Tactical ever since that Jarvis comp came in. It's very close in performance to the Staccato XC, the closest I have found. And believe it or not, I'm not the only person that carries crazy competition guns for EDC. There are dozens of us. However, I realize that that's going to be few and far between. There's not many of us. Most people are going to be interested in a compensator that is designed for EDC, but when it comes to something like the Monsu Tactical Lucky 7s ports that get kind of close to those compensators, but not quite, those are going to absolutely smoke this, with the downside of spit and shrapnel and basically turning the end of your gun into a repeating frag grenade. Now the final thing, and this is going to segue into the conclusion here, when you start adding compensators or ports to your guns, weird, unexplainable things can happen. I've got all of my notes from chronographing these things, and some really weird stuff happens with the ballistics of your gun when you start messing with this stuff. For example, these ports on the Beretta reduced the muzzle velocity of standard pressure ammunition by about 30 feet per second, but it boosted the velocity of plus P ammunition by about 12 feet per second. That was the only ported gun that saw any kind of weird anomaly like that across any load of ammunition that I shot. And these are all 10-shot averages, and that was so weird, I tested it twice and got the same results on 2 different days. Now the weird thing is the point of impact shift on this Beretta barrel. When you were shooting standard pressure and you had it all zeroed in, you put in that plus P, and you're losing 30 feet per second on standard pressure, and you're picking up 12 feet per second over OEM with the plus P ammunition, the point of impact shift was like 5 inches off. So that's one of the reasons I actually didn't like these ports, is because I train with standard pressure 124 and I carry 124 plus P HSTs, and the difference between those two loads was so far off that it made training with them complicated. Now here's the other weird thing. The Parker Mountain Machine Ultra Comp did the same thing. Now granted, this thing increased velocity over the OEM barrel because it's a longer barrel that they put it on, but you'd zero it in for standard pressure ammunition, you put in plus P, point of impact shift was again like 6 inches off. So it made training with it complicated. But those were the only 2 anomalies. Out of all of the other comped and ported guns that I tried, plus P and standard pressure ammunition were so close it was negligible. Another weird inconsistency with ports is when I had a firearm zeroed to its OEM barrel and I put the ported barrel in, there would be a dramatic point of impact shift. But when I had it zeroed to an OEM barrel and put a brand new match grade threaded barrel on there with a compensator, it was very close. The zero was within an inch every time across the board. There's definitely still a point of impact shift on that threaded barrel with the comp, but it's not nearly as dramatic as I've seen with ports. And then there's the accuracy issue of the Glock 19C was punching pretty tight groups from a rest, but all the other ported guns that I shot struggled. So again, might have been the polygonal rifling, just weird things happen to these guns when you start messing with them. And that includes reliability. Like I said, we saw changes in ejection patterns, not just weak ejection, but with the Radian Ramjet Afterburner, inconsistent ejection. And while I never had a malfunction, something is happening with the physics of that gun. You change something in there that the ejection changes. Take it out, consistent ejection. Put it in, every once in a while it'll throw around right over your back. And the question is, why? And why is it only 1 out of every 10 or 12 rounds? Speaking of inconsistency, on a lot of the reviews about my compensators and videos and shorts I've posted of ported guns, I get comments of people saying, mine's not running. I have the same thing you have, and it is not cycling. So keep in mind, it could just be a fluke, and anyone who follows me knows that I'm the guy that everything breaks on. I'm the guy that everything goes wrong on, but maybe I cashed in all of my luck on these compensators and ports to have never had a malfunction. However, I did have a malfunction when I first put the True Precision barrel in the G48. That was a part of barrel break-in, which again, you start putting crap on your guns, it can cause weird, unpredictable things to happen. On my SIG P320 Spectre Comp, when I did that review, it ran 100% flawlessly with every load, 115, 124, 147, including plus P ammunition. The thing ran and I stood by it. Then my comments were flooded by people who had nothing but stovepipes, weak ejection, and issues with it, and I was kind of blown away. So you're not even safe buying a gun that comes with a comp on it from the factory. And I think that's one of the reasons that SIG is really pushing this integral comp with cuts in the slide, because it's more likely to cycle reliably. And the reason it does that is because it's really not working all that much. Sure, it reduces muzzle rise some. You can feel it shooting like a standard P365XL next to an X macro. You can feel it. But is it enough to make any kind of significant impact? I would argue no. So that's going to bring us into the conclusion and my final thoughts. This is going to be my statement on the matter. If you disagree with me or have any thoughts of your own, let me know in the comments down below after I'm done, while I'm talking, before I start talking. But here is my conclusion. For the vast, vast, vast majority of people, 99.9%, do not mess with your carry gun. And that includes a recommendation from me to avoid buying guns that come from the factory with a compensator or ports. Keep it stock and work on your technique and train, get good instruction, and then practice and apply that instruction. That is going to do 99.9% of the work in controlling muzzle rise and recoil impulse. It is going to make you a significantly better shooter to the point where you can pick up any gun, including little micro guns that kick a lot, and run it very well. And for the vast majority of self-defense scenarios, you are going to be just fine with a stock Glock 19 or a CZP-10, whatever, just completely stock. Whether it's a carjacker or a mugger or an insane homeless person that's schizo and thinks that you're an alien and is trying to stab you, that is going to be more than enough. And in fact, in the vast majority of those cases, just the presence of a firearm will stop those encounters without even having to fire a shot. If you do need to fire a shot, having just a stock blaster is going to solve 99% of those instances. And in fact, when you look at Eli Dickin and Jack Wilson and every other good guy with a gun that's put down a bad guy with a gun on the spot, these civilians, they are not running ports and compensators. They're running stock guns with iron sights and putting these worst case scenario threats down. For 99.9% of people, it is not worth risking the unpredictability of ballistic performance and reliability that playing with comps and ports brings to the table. However, if you're already a proficient shooter and you've hit a plateau and you want to get that extra 1% of performance out of your gun, then be willing to put 1,000 rounds through whichever setup you decide to run for your EDC, whether it's the Radian Ramjet Afterburner, whether it's a Parker Mountain Machine Comp or Monsoon Tactical Ports. You may have to experiment with different spring weights to get the thing tuned in. Once you get it the way you're thinking about carrying it, you have to put at least 1,000 rounds through it to vet your individual setup. Just because the Radian Ramjet Afterburner worked 100% reliably for me does not mean that that's the case for you. You have to think about things like tolerances changing from gun to gun. I mean, you can see the wear spot on the hood of the barrel on this Radian Ramjet Afterburner of where the barrel has broken in to fit the gun. I would not toss this thing in any Glock and call it good to go without putting at least 1,000 rounds through it with, whatever ammo I'm training with, and tossing in a significant number of my carry rounds. Like I said, this one had a malfunction while I was breaking the barrel in. You also need to test it for limp wristing, get a weird grip on it, shoot from unconventional positions. You have to run these things into the dirt after you've set it up. You have to bench this thing, see how it performs with different loads accuracy-wise, and be prepared to be disappointed if it doesn't work. Be prepared to have to troubleshoot potential issues and get frustrated. It's an expensive gamble, and you might end up ruining your barrel with bad ports. You might end up wasting money buying a gun with ports or a comp on it, or you might end up being stuck with a comp that you don't like, Loctited on your gun. Do not let my testing be the end-all be-all. You must thoroughly test your individual gear. Do not trust a YouTuber because one, they might be dishonest, and two, tolerances vary. So for 99.9% of you, do not worry about this. Focus on your technique. For the 0.1% of you that want to get a little more performance out of your gun, you want to be able to shoot this thing faster and keep tighter groups at insane speeds, then just thoroughly vet whatever setup you decide to go with. Is it worth it for me? I would say absolutely yes. I don't see a world where I take the Radian off of my Glock. I don't see a world where I would carry a Staccato P over a Staccato XC. While it's a very small increase in performance, it's an advantage nonetheless that significantly shows up on the timer when it comes to splits or how long it takes to do a bill drill and your group size when shooting at those insane speeds. And it really starts to show itself on very challenging standards. As far as ports go, I just can't recommend them for everyday carry. I feel like a lot of people are forgetting about the different facets of carrying a firearm. Everyone is really focused on marksmanship and meeting these elite standards that people are forgetting that there's such a thing as fighting with your gun or fighting over your gun. I'm talking up close, personal, lightning fast, and chaotic fighting with your gun, close quarters. Have you ever seen those videos on YouTube where you have two guys in a UFC cage and they toss a blue gun into the middle of the ring and say, go? You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. So if you are shooting competition, if you are chasing challenge coins or trying to meet elite standards for an instructor or a class, I say 2 thumbs up on ports. It's going to be the best way to go. It's going to be the cheapest. It's not going to add weight or bulk to your gun. And it's going to arguably, if you get something like Lucky 7s, more efficient than most compensators that were designed for concealed carry. It just makes sense. However, for self-defense, if you are convinced that you will never have to shoot from retention, that you are always going to get perfect presentation, or if you have to shoot from retention, you're going to be able to really crank your gun over and shoot from retention like this, then I say go for it. Do not let me stop you. Only you know what's best for you. You can gather research information and differing opinions and come to your own conclusion. This is just my opinion. It's not special. Everybody has one. Just trust me, that shrapnel that I got in my arm, you do not want in your eyes. Whew. That took longer than I thought it would, but hopefully there was a lot of good information in there, and I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to support the channel, don't forget to be subscribed and leave a comment down below. The links in the description below are the place to be if you'd like to toss some money into the channel pool. And of course, don't forget to check out my sponsors, DPM Systems, for some legitimately excellent products, especially when it comes to ports and comps. Guys, it was great seeing you again, and I'll see you in the next video. I'm Brett, and this was Nightwood Guns. Nightwood out.